Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. Welcome to this month's Connect with Control-M. Today we'll be talking about the Control-M agent execution modes, root, non-root, and Sudo. My name is Ted Levitt, and I'm a lead technical support analyst here at BMC. I support the Control-M products for distributed. You can enhance your auditing capabilities, security, and add more flexibility to your job's user authentication. Are you interested in seeing the Control-M agent submit jobs as different users, including root? And we're going to cover these topics in the next 20 minutes or so. First, I'd like to introduce today's panelists. In addition to myself, I have Chris Polanski and Brian Looney joining me from support. If you do have any questions during the presentation, please do feel free to put them in at any time to the Q&A panel and just address those to all panelists. I'm going to scoot over to our agenda, and some of the items I'm going to be talking about this morning. We're going to cover a brief history of the execution modes for the Control-M agents. We're going to be talking about applying maintenance or fix packs to the Control-M agent and how the mode relates to that. We're going to talk about the details of the different execution modes. We're going to talk about how we can change between the different modes. I'm going to demonstrate the execution of jobs in non-root and Sudo mode and demonstrate the changing of the modes on a Control-M agent. I'm going to be using Ubuntu Server 15.10, which was recently introduced support. And then we're going to talk about some troubleshooting and tips with the agent execution, and then we'll be answering your questions. So first off, brief history of how the agent works. In 6.4.01 and prior, we required that the agent be run as root. As root, we had access to run jobs as any other users, but since the agent was running in root mode, it was running as a privileged user, and it presented the potential for some security problems. In version 7 and beyond, we introduced the non-root mode. This gave you the ability to run the agent as a user other than root, typically the agent owner, and still run jobs as other users. It meant that the agent didn't run as root and it wasn't a privileged process. Now, more recently, with the version 9 agent FixPack 100, we added what we call Sudo mode. So the agent can now actually leverage the existing functionality on the operating system, the Sudo, and it basically gives this authority or power back to your system and security administrators to control the executions on the Control-M agents, rather than having the Control-M managers or schedulers manage the security. Now, when we're running in these different modes, it does impact slightly how we're applying the fix packs. And with version 8 agents, we introduced the no downtime feature, which means you don't have to stop the Control-M agent in order to apply the fix pack. Still earlier agents, you had to stop it, but running a no downtime maintenance, if the agent was running as root in root mode, you would need to log on as root to apply the maintenance. But if you're running in non-root mode or in Sudo mode, you can actually run the fix pack setup as the agent owner, which basically lets you do this without any root authority, perhaps giving some people some more flexibility. Now, when we're talking about how root mode works, again, the agent processes are owned by root. The agent is started as root. And the actual execution itself performs in SU. And I'll show you this more in detail later. I have some diagnostic output. But essentially what we're doing is we're performing an SU dash to the run as user, so we get their environment, and then we run essentially some wrapper and this is the Control-M magic that goes on to set the user's environment, deal with the auto-edit variables, and so forth. Now, this differs slightly when we change it to non-root mode. So when we're running in non-root mode, again, the agent is started as another user, typically the agent owner, and we have to make a couple of changes. we use our own utility called su_bmc, and this is suid to root, which means that it's this specific utility is running with root privilege. And we also change some permissions on the sysout directory to essentially ensure it's accessible. The execution changes up a little bit as well. Again, we're using the submc that's going to be privileged. It's going to be using that user's environment in a similar syntax as the SU with a dash, run as user. Since we're not running as root, we have to provide it with the credentials. So we're providing the encrypted password with the run as user, and then the wrapper in similar form. And then there are two additional parameters you'll notice. There's the 0 and Y. In this case, the 0 represents the debug level, 0 through 5, and the Y represents whether or not PAM authentication is enabled. It's the enable_PAM in the agent configuration. It defaults to yes, no, or N is also a valid value. Now, sudo mode has some of the same characteristics as non-root mode. The agent, again, is started as the agent owner, non-root, so it's non-privileged. We aren't setting SUID on a file. Nothing is going to be running as root. We still change the mode on the sysout directory to ensure access. And then when we're executing jobs, we're actually issuing to the operating system a sudo command, -n for non-interactive, -u for the user, and the command being that wrapper. And again, we'll talk about this in a little greater detail later. To change between the modes, we're using the set_agent_mode script. Now, this has several options. In here, you'll notice you have enable non-root, root, sudo mode, and prepare for non-root install. Options 1, 2, and 4, non-root, root, and prepare for root install, these must be run as root. And they must be run as root because they require the change in ownership and mode on certain files, and that can only be done as root typically. Option number 3, the enable sudo mode, can be run as the agent owner typically. The one exception for that is that if non-root mode had been enabled previously, as you saw on the prior slide, we had set UID and changed ownership of the submc to root. So you need to be root to undo that change. Okay. Now, I'd like to go and share my screen, and I'm going to do a demonstration of the non-root and sudo mode. And I have here a Control-M Enterprise Manager 9, FixPack1, a Control-M Server 9, FixPack1, and a Control-M Agent on Ubuntu Server 15.10. It's an Agent 9 FixPack1. So the first thing I want to do is I have this agent in non-root mode is I'm going to order a job that I've prepared, and I have this job. It's going to be run as a user 0, and it's performing a simple command line that's going to essentially show the ID of that user to verify that it's being run as that user. So I've ordered this job, and we can see that it nearly immediately failed. And we're going to go and take a look at the log and see why it failed. In the log, we see a message. The agent is running in non-root mode, and password for owner user 0 has not been defined. So that's pretty clear. Since the non-root mode agent isn't running with root privilege, we have to provide credentials for any users that we're using. And we do this through the configuration manager. We go to the security tab and select run as, and this will present our run as users authentication. And we're going to add user 0 to the Control-M. So my run as user is going to be user 0. I'm going to specify a particular agent here. And the name of my agent is called CWCM-AGU for my Ubuntu server. and I'm going to put in this user's password. And then I'm going to perform a test to ensure that our credentials are valid. They're valid, and I'm going to close this dialog. Now that I've provided the user's credentials, I'm going to rerun the job, and I expect it to end successfully. We'll then take a look at the output of that job and see that it's running as user 0. So this is essentially how the non-root mode execution works with credentials provided from the Control-M server to the agent used in the execution. So now what I want to do is I want to show you real quick an alternative to the configuration manager. There's a utility on the Control-M server and the Control-M agent called CTM setown. You can run this and it'll provide you some syntax. On the agent, the ability of the utility is a little more limited. It allows us to update passwords. If we run this on the Control-M server, we can see that we have more options, and this essentially gives us the same ability as in the configuration manager. We can add a user, delete a user, update that user's password, etc. So this is a batch alternative to the configuration manager user authentications. All right. So now I'm going to change to Sudo mode. So I am the Control-M agent here. In order to change to Sudo mode, since I had previously used non-root mode, I'm going to have to SU to the root user. And I'm briefly going to show you the SUBMC that we were talking about earlier. And we can see here in the exe vault directory, here's our SU_BMC utility, and we can see that it's owned by root and has SUID root, which is indicated by this S in the execute position for the user octet here. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to go to the scripts directory as root, and I'm going to run set agent mode. It's asking me for the agent owner. Assume the correct. And then we're going to enable Sudo mode. And we can see here the items that I discussed earlier. It's changing some permissions and ownership on some things. It's then asking me to restart the agent. Since the configuration item has changed, we're going to need to restart the agent in this case. I'm going to answer yes. It's going to kill the agent and restart it. And now we're running in Sudo mode. So Sudo uses the sudoers file. This is typically in the etc directory. And while it can get quite complex, I've tried to simplify it a little bit here. I'm using a run as alias, which is one way you can do things. I've created a run as alias called CTM run. I have two users specified in it, user 1 and user 2. I then use this run as alias in the sudoers file below, specifically for the CTM agent user. And what this line essentially means is the CTM agent user from all nodes can run all commands with these run as users, user 1, user 2, and not prompt for password. So again, CTM agent can sudo to user 1 and user 2 and do anything. So I'm going to quit out of here, and then we're going to pop back over to the GUI. And we have our user 0 job here. And I'm going to rerun the user 0 job. And what do we expect to happen? This will actually end not okay. While we have provided credentials for user 0, those work in non-root mode. The job is failing because CTM agent does not have the ability to sudo to user 0. It wasn't specified in the run as alias or another rule in the file. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to order another job that I've set up to run as user 1, which I have not provided credentials for. I'm going to order this. And we'll see here the job runs and ends okay. We can check out the log and the output really quickly. And we can see here in the log, the job ends okay. And then the output, we see that we actually were user 1. Now, on the various Unix operating systems, the Sudo typically logs to a log file. In the case of Ubuntu here, we can see that we have a file called auth-log. And this is where you'll notice that we've executed something by CTM agent as user 1. So again, when we talk about giving power or this role back to the systems people, this is essentially allowing the systems people to do security audit and things like this more outside of Control-M and gives the access to this information to them at a higher level. That concludes our demo here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to talk a little bit about tips and tricks. Like I mentioned earlier, when we're doing Sudo, it's typically logged to a log file on the system. It depends on the operating system and how Sudo or syslog is configured. You'll find it typically going to someplace like varlog secure on a Red Hat system, or varlog auth-log on a Debian system. On Solaris, it might be something like var-adm log secure, something along those lines. But this information is available to the system administrators, and in most cases is secured so that only root has access to read those files since they're security related. Now, we have a couple of knowledge articles. One in particular here, the 113279, has some details a little bit on Sudo. We would refer you to the Sudo man page typically and have the system administrator be involved in terms of the Sudo configuration, but that has a little more information in there. And then we have 114119, which discusses the issue I had mentioned earlier about changing to Sudo mode after non-root mode had been enabled, and there are a couple of errors that are issued, and that talks about that problem. Now, in terms of troubleshooting, what we can do is typically from a Control-M perspective, if something works from outside of Control-M, we would expect it to work inside of Control-M. And this takes us to an execution failing. What we would do in the case of a Sudo or even non-root would be to take the execution as it's built by the Control-M agent and attempt to do that outside of the Control-M agent. And I'll show you here what it looks like in some debug for logs in the AM logs on the agent. You'll see here, and this relates back to the earlier slides with the details, this is how a non-root mode execution gets built. We can see in the 0 of the array, we can see the full path to the SUBMC, and then dash user 0. The private data represents the encrypted password, -C for the command, and then here is what I referred to as the wrapper. You can see we create a temporary file to store environmental information, and then we have the command line wrapped as well, and then we use this redirection to create the output file. In this case, the 4 that follows is the debug level. I had it in debug 4, and the Y indicates that the PAM authentication was enabled, and we can see here in this case, fork return is the PID of the child, and then error 0 indicates success. So let's take a look real quick at the Sudo mode. You'll see a theme developing here. This is the execution of a job, a command line job in Sudo. We run sudo -n-u user1, and then we'll see sh-c and our environment and temporary script redirected to the output. That's that wrapper that I was referring to. And then probably the most simple type of execution of root mode, the agent started as root, running as root. We're using the SU with root authority. We're changing user with the SU-user2, and then executing a wrapper. Well, thank you for taking time out of your day to attend. I hope the information I provided was useful. You'll be receiving a survey as you close the webinar, and we do encourage you to please fill out that survey and give us some feedback to improve our future webinars, and do provide us some topics that you may like to see as well. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and our past webinars can be seen on the BMC Communities, YouTube, and iTunes. We'll post today's webinar in a few days. Our next topic is going to be the new features in Control-M for SAP 8, which is going to be in June. And at this point in time, we'll start talking about your questions, but we'd also like to ask that you visit our BMC Communities site, and you can connect with other users and view webinars, and this is where we post our follow-up, our text answers to the Q&A that we're presenting, that we're going to be answering now. You can access the BMC Communities from the bmc.com homepage, and you can also get to it via communities.bmc.com. Now, we'll start on the Q&A. If you haven't already, please post your questions to all panelists in the Q&A panel, and while we address your questions, we'll just bring up the slides with our previous webinar topics.